My name's Gavin Hayes. I'm the General Secretary of Compass. And before I introduce our final speakers, may I take this opportunity to ask you to join me in thanking all of our amazing volunteers today, all of whom have given up their Saturday. Who've given up their Saturday in the cause of progressive politics. And I think their very presence and efforts today show us that there is a new hope for the future. And our speakers this afternoon have all been leading lights in championing a new hope and a new politics. Pam Giddy, who I had the pleasure to sit opposite once when Compass first had a desk, in the Citizens Inquiry Office, which then became the highly influential Power Inquiry, which in turn turned into Power 2010. And so how delighted was I when on the Saturday after the election, I switch on the TV, wake up a bit sort of, hungover, a bit blurry-eyed, and there's Pam on BBC News 24, not Sky News. There's Pam on BBC News 24 leading a purple revolution outside the former headquarters of the Labour Party at local Government House, holding Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats to account on democratic reform. And she's done an absolutely amazing job in those days during the coalition talks. And I hope all of us in this room can work with Pam and work with others in holding this government to account to their promises of democratic reform. And our second speaker will be John Cruddas, who needs no introductions, but who is the newly re-elected MP for Dagenham and Rainham, and in who in the general election led and fought against the BNP and ensured hope won over hate. And then we will hear from Chuka, the newly elected MP for Streatham, someone who has been an absolute inspiration and energy to all of us here today, and who embodies a new hope for the future. So Pam, we'll hear from you first, then John, and then Chuka.
I can't hear whether... Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much. And can I just say I'm delighted to be here, and you guys must have had a very, very tiring day, both in discussion with each other, but also listening to some amazing speakers. I thought that last session was very good. I feel especially proud to be here today, because I feel like I'm with the Compass boy band. Chuka, John, Neil and Gareth. How fantastic is that? A record deal coming their way soon, I think. When Neil asked me if I'd come and speak at this session, I was really pleased, partly because I knew I'd be with the boy band. When I asked him what he wanted me to say, because if any of you have ever been collared by Neil, you always have to ask him what he wants you to say, because he always knows. And he said, I don't really mind, but something about democracy, something raunchy and rallying. And I said to him, can I just remind you, I work in the area of democratic reform. Those words are not usually associated with that subject area. In fact, my experience has shown quite the opposite. When I explain to parents at the school gate when I drop my children off to school in the morning what I do, you can see them visibly glaze over. You can see them sort of edging away and praying silently that they're not sat next to me at the next parent social. Democratic reform, yawn. Constitutional reform, double yawn. Until recently. And we all know it, it was the expenses scandal. Suddenly people were sort of rushing over to find out what I thought and what it meant. It was as if it was the one issue that, amongst all the others that happened in recent years, focused attention so sort of significantly on our democracy, on our conventions, and more acutely than anything else, on the sort of almost delicate sort of noble way or ignoble way that we do it. We were sort of united as a country in a sense of disbelief that anything like this could happen, and united again in the sense that we didn't want it to happen again. It was the light that shone into the darker corners of our democracy and exposed, amongst other things, the rotting beams of our democratic structures. So although the expenses scandal for me was a sort of inspirational moment in lots of senses, because it brought lots of those parents at the school gate to talk about issues of democracy and democratic renewal, many of you, like me, have been arguing for democratic reform for many years. This wasn't a campaign that started last April, thanks to the Daily Telegraph. First, we had the battle to get the Labour Party in opposition under Neil Kinnock to even accept democratic reform was an issue for the Labour movement. I felt like somebody at AA many a time when I'd go into meetings when I was at Charter 88 in very early days, and it was almost like you'd say, my name is Pam Giddy, I believe in democratic reform. And then we argued, the argument then was to say, it isn't just about who's in power, it's about how we do politics. And at the time when you have a party that's been in opposition for so long, that's quite a hard message to try and get across. And then in power, under Tony Blair, the battle became to get Labour to keep to its commitments and to keep going. And under Gordon Brown, who intellectually understood and advocated wholesale democratic reform, the fight became, do it. And then it became simply, oh, please do something. But looking back over those years of trying to make the issue of democratic reform real, an irony occurs to me, and has done over the last few weeks. The more that we've been fighting for democratic reform, the less engaged people seem to have become in formal politics. And I find that really a tricky one to understand. On any measure, turnout, membership, candidacy, financial contributions, most of us, or increasing number of us, just don't want to be involved. And for me, it signals one thing, the need not for piecemeal, delicate reform, but more radical reform. The sort that doesn't happen overnight, and the sort that needs political leadership. But it needs political leadership that takes people, and not just the people in this room, but civil society, the women at the school gate that I meet every day, along with them. And I was really upset hearing those candidates today by one thing one of them said, which is, people don't talk to me about electoral reform at the doorstep. Do you know what? I thought we'd put that one to bed. People may not use those words, but they are talking about choice and they are talking about fairness to you. And I did feel like standing up and saying to Ed Balls, nobody talked to you about tuition fees, nobody talked to you about the Iraq War either, but you still listened and did something. Not necessarily the right thing. So going through speeches, and I've been quite reflective over the last few weeks because we've been arguing for democratic reform and particularly arguing for electoral reform, and then having to work out whether this is the new politics, this is the balanced parliament, the coalition government. Is this what we've been fighting for? And time again, looking at the speeches of politicians particularly, the same phrases came up from going back into sort of the early 90s. New politics in the third way, Tony Blair. New politics and progressive politics, Gordon Brown. New politics and the big society, David Cameron. New politics and Nick Clegg. But what does it mean? And what do our political leaders mean when they say it? They all seem desperate to offer us something because they sense, I think, that we want something, but they themselves are not quite sure what it is that we're asking for. The frustration of recent years has been that when a senior politician, and sadly it has been over the last few years, Labour senior politicians particularly, when they stand up and they offer a new politics, we simply don't believe them anymore. The words seem hollow, and even if they believe what they say at that particular moment, most of us dismiss it. They're just words, they don't really believe it, they're not going to deliver. So what do we do now? Today we find ourselves, I feel, in a unique political position. Quite an interesting one, if not the one we might have wanted to be in. We have a coalition government. It's new to us. I mean, I love watching the BBC political correspondents desperately trying to work out how to report this government. We have a public that's lost faith in politics and, crucially, the political process in a way I haven't witnessed over the last 20 years. And we have a country facing a dire financial crisis. Now, some will say that tinkering with our democratic arrangements is a distraction.